Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Before we get started, I'm really excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Have you ever Googled yourself and was surprised to see your personal information displayed on one of those public listing sites? It's unbelievable what comes up. These are caused by data brokers that are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you. Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. The brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do. But you can let Aura handle it for you. You can try Aura free for 2 weeks using my link, aura.com/crimereel. You also get access to the Aura app. It's really easy to set up so you don't have to download several different apps to get things such as parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. You get everything at one affordable price. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. At this moment, Aura is only available in the US. So remember, go to aura.com/crimereel to start your 2-week free trial. And now, on with the case. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the case of John and Leigh Sabine, a couple who lived a life of deception and lies, which culminated in Leigh being accused of committing the perfect murder, but not until after her death in 2015. Around 1941, Leigh was born to Ronald and Margaret Evans. She was their first daughter, and 3 years later they had a second child, who they named Susan. Ronald was a coal miner, and Margaret was known to be a petty criminal. Their marriage was short-lived, and by the time the girls were 5 and 2 years old, they had been abandoned by their parents and spent many of their youngest years bouncing between relatives and foster homes. Ronald would later remarry, and at this point, Leigh and Susan went to live with their father and his new wife. The couple struggled to parent the two girls, particularly Leigh, who was known to be rebellious, made up elaborate stories, and lied extensively. The couple referred to Leigh as a devil child and ultimately sent her to London to live with her aunt and uncle. It is believed that Susan remained with her father and stepmother at this time. Leigh's uncle, Leslie, and Aunt Dorothy made no attempt to discipline her, instead indulging her every whim. Dorothy worked in nursing and encouraged Leigh to do the same, so by the age of 17, Leigh was working as a nurse in a hospital in Bedfordshire, England. It was here that she met John Sabine, a 28-year-old married man with 2 children. The pair soon embarked upon an affair, with Leigh falling pregnant shortly afterwards. When John's wife found out about the affair, she threw him out of the house, telling their 2 young children, Christopher and Caroline, that their father had died in the Korean War. Leigh gave birth to a daughter who she named Susan after a younger sister, and when John's divorce from his first wife was finalised, the couple married in November of 1960. They lived in various locations in England before settling in the southwest, where John worked as an accountant, whilst Leigh raised Susan and their 3 other children, who were born over the next few years, Stephen, Martin and Jane. Their final child, Leigh, was born in 1967. Around this time, John was accused of defrauding his company, and soon after, John, Leigh and the 5 children moved to New Zealand. However, their time there was relatively short-lived. By 1969, they were on the move again, but this time they left their 5 children, aged between 2 and 11, behind, abandoning them in a state-run nursery in Auckland. They told the children that they would be back to collect them in a few days. They never returned. With further accusations of fraud being made against John, the couple made their way to Australia under the names of John and Leigh Martin. While their children remained in care, Leigh set about trying to achieve what she saw as a more glamorous lifestyle. She wanted to be a singer and, above all, famous. She worked for a while as a cabaret singer, but her career soon faltered and the elusive fame was never achieved. 3 years after abandoning their children, they also abandoned Leigh's hopes of a glittering career and moved back to New Zealand, but still did not make contact with their children. It wouldn't be until over a decade later that Leigh and John would finally attempt to trace their children, and when they finally did, their daughters, Jane and Leanne, alerted both the authorities and the local media. The couple hit the headlines, becoming notorious for dumping their children and sneaking back into the country. The New Zealand Minister for Social Welfare ordered an investigation into their treatment of their children, but the couple managed to escape prosecution. Incredulously, they repeatedly claimed that they had left their children out of love and simply did not have the money to return for them. After months of media attention, Leigh and John decided to return to the UK. Not long after this, Leigh, who was now in her late 40s or early 50s, began an affair with a 20-something-year-old violent criminal by the name of Steve. She even went so far as to hide him from the police when he arrived at her house covered in blood. The relationship was abusive, but nevertheless Leigh stayed. When John eventually caught up with her, in a bizarre twist to the story, he began living with his wife and her new lover. However, by 1995, the pair had tired of Steve's violent ways and left him, moving to Wales. They eventually moved to flats in the village of Bethel near Pontypridd, where they signed a joint tenancy agreement in February 1997. Leigh became instantly recognisable in the local area with her long blonde hair, tight clothing, long red nails, and a penchant for telling elaborate stories and tales. She was quite a distinctive presence within the village. She was a larger-than-life, flamboyant character who would tell her friends and neighbours about how she had been a model, a famous Australian nightclub singer, and that she had previously been married to a millionaire, none of which was true. Her tales would often contradict each other, and she told some people that she had 5 children who lived in New Zealand, but told others that her children had tragically died in a house fire. At some point in 1997, John disappeared. Leigh told her friends that her husband had always been an abusive womanizer who had left her for another woman. She later claimed that he had left her after she had a double mastectomy. Time moved on, and in 2006, Leigh began a relationship with a man by the name of Derek Ellis. Derek lived with Leigh for around 4 years, despite his daughters having an intense dislike of his new girlfriend. When the couple eventually split, the daughters held Leigh responsible for their father's drinking and ultimately his untimely death. Leigh was known to be a keen gardener and tended the communal garden areas at the flats where she lived. She added statues, plants, tables and benches to make it nicer for all of the residents to enjoy. She kept her flat meticulously clean and owned lots of ornaments and knickknacks, but never any photographs of the family who she claimed either lived in New Zealand or had sadly died there. In August 2015, Leigh had a fall and a subsequent scan revealed that she had late-stage brain cancer. As her health declined, she reportedly told her hairdresser, Bernadette, that people will be talking about me long after I've gone, to the extent I could be classified as famous. When Bernadette asked why, she answered, because of the body in the bag. One neighbour, Michelle James, recalled Leigh telling her about a medical skeleton she kept in her flat that had been used when she was training to be a nurse. Leigh also asked one of her carers, Lynn Williams, to move this medical skeleton for her. Lynn joked that she hoped it wasn't an actual body, to which Leigh replied, "You never know," with a smile and a wag of her finger. Leigh's health declined quickly, and this once larger-than-life figure was fast becoming a shadow of her former self, with no family to care for her as her life reached an end. Those around her continued to take little notice of her tall tales. That is until after Leigh's death on the 30th of October 2015. As her flat was being cleared out, Leigh's neighbour, Michelle James, thought that the medical skeleton would be the perfect prop to play a prank on a friend. She found the skeleton in a communal area of the garden near the bins. As she started to remove the wrapping, instead of revealing a medical skeleton, it was soon apparent that the parcel contained a partially decomposed body. The authorities were called and established that the body was that of a man who'd had a hip replacement and was wearing Marks and Spencer's pyjamas and a signet ring. The body had been wrapped in over 40 layers of tin foil, cling film, old bags and roofing material, and bound tightly with green string. Initially, the authorities had no idea who the body belonged to, but from door-to-door inquiries, the police soon found out about Leigh's medical skeleton, which put them on the right track, and the body was eventually identified as belonging to John. The level of wrapping of the corpse had resulted in a process called chemical mummification. John's body was so well preserved, despite him being dead for around 18 years, that the autopsy could even show that he had drunk a small amount of alcohol prior to his death. It also showed that John had been killed by a blow to the head, which had split his skull and crucially had left a very unusual outline. As details of the gruesome find were made public, the police were contacted by an old friend of Leigh and John Sabine. This friend, Valerie Chalkley, told the police that Leigh had contacted her out of the blue in 1997, and when Valerie had asked after John, Leigh had calmly said she had killed him with a stone frog. Valerie, knowing Leigh's history of telling lies, initially laughed off Leigh's comments, but decided to phone her back the following day just to put her mind at rest. When Valerie asked about John, Leigh said that he was fine, so Valerie thought little more of what she had assumed was another of Leigh's elaborate tales. It was even reported that the phrase, "watch out or I will frog you," became an inside joke among some of Leigh's friends. Knowing that Leigh's possessions had recently been cleared, the police returned to the flat with a slim hope of trying to find the stone frog that Valerie had told them about. Fortunately, a fellow resident at the flats was still in possession of the frog that had belonged to Leigh. The shape of this 2-pound stone frog was a perfect match to the injuries that John had sustained. A verdict of unlawful killing was delivered by Senior Coroner Andrew Barclay, as it was concluded beyond doubt that foul play was the cause of John's death. Detective Chief Inspector Gareth Morgan said that it was his view that Leigh Sabine killed John and wrapped up his body. There was no evidence to suggest that anyone else was either involved or aware of his death. The detective went on to state that there had been many indications of what Leigh had done, stating that she liked to create attention, she liked to be theatrical. There were even suggestions that for most of the 18 years that Leigh had been hiding John's body, it had been kept under her bed. This would have included the years when she was living with Derek Ellis. John and Leigh's eldest son, Stephen, was later quoted as saying that he believed his father was a good man, a soft-hearted man, who had been led astray by his controlling, conniving mother. He went on to state that he could never forgive his father for abandoning him and his siblings as children, but that he believed his father fell in love and was manipulated by an evil woman, which was his biggest crime. It would seem that at least locally, after her death, Leigh finally gained some of the fame that she had so desperately craved during her life. That concludes today's story. My sincere thanks to Sarah82ish for suggesting covering this case. Some of you may remember this case being covered by me from a few months ago. I had to re-record it as I had a copyright issue with some of the photos. Hopefully this is resolved now. Petty crime time, as we had a Welsh case. I'm pleased to say we have a wonderful cat called The Butt. He is 7, lives in Wales, and is a lover of boxes, box lids, and a specialist in yawning. I am a great admirer of The Butt. I hope you all like my butt photos. Thanks to Scott for sending them in. Hello to David from San Francisco. He has sent in his sofa-destroying cats, Smokey and Midnight. You can see them in the background there. However, check out this photo of either Smokey or midnight. Hilarious. The cats are closely supervised by the squirrel-chasing Pembroke Welsh corgi called Jack. Hi Jack. Your green eye thing is a little bit weird. Thanks for sending them in, David. Please add any comments down below. As always, I'll be interested in reading them. Thank you for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Some of the criticism aimed at John and Leigh was that they went on to show their pedigree dogs at dog shows, but couldn't be bothered to collect their own children back. Goodbye.